Hey, folks. Dr. Kyle. So what's the doctor in? The doctorate.
Electrical engineering.
Very cool. That is definitely a commitment of time.
It was fun.
Hey, Josh.
Hey, Steve. How's it going?
Looks pretty sunny there.
Hey, yeah, the sun finally came out. Peeking through the clouds.
I had just enough to have to close my blinds for a bit, but that's about as far as it went.
You're not actually you're at a lake house right now?
No, it kind of gives away when the water is not moving. I tried doing the videos. First of all, you got to hold the camera, the phone steady enough, and then you got to figure out how to do the loop thing, and that's all illusion. I'd rather just be in those places for real at sometimes. So we'll see. Hey, Brandon, you go. And Ram, there you go, Ram.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. Okay, so let me just make sure I copy this.
What is logging into RSVP? Is that getting us anything? Like I noticed, I clicked on the link. Is that like some kind of attendance keeper or something?
Do you mean on the community CNCF.io website?
Yeah, it was like one of the links in the doc.
Yeah.
The LFX link?
Back attendance or anything. They use that same thing for like community groups and stuff. So then it's more relevant. We just use it to give people an invite if you want. So yeah, use it as you will. I don't even subscribe or RSVP to those. We'll still let you in.
Okay.
Uh-oh, it's 4 after. We usually start these things at 3 after, right?
We're not going to do 3.5.
I stopped looking at clocks.
3.7.
I stopped looking at clocks a long time ago.
Because you can't ever figure it's the hour that you have a problem with because you don't know
That's true. Well, no, that's not true because I'm in India. It's 30.
That's true. Isn't there a place that's 15 minutes off also?
No, I don't know about 15. Newfoundland's 30, so if you're in Canada, you get 30 there too.
I want to do a Where's Waldo version of Andrew. Where's Andrew?
Buenos Aires.
Nice.
Thank you to whoever started the notes because I totally forgot to start the notes when I put them into Slack. So thank you.
Okay, so I think we can start. So let's look at last meeting's action items. So the tag app delivery website. I don't know if there is a website yet. I think so. At least the repository website is up. So this is something that we merged. Thanks for doing this. So if somebody comes and says, what is it that you guys are working on, at least we have something to show here. And we'll fill this up as time goes on. Next thing was there were a couple of open issues and open PRs. We did merge a few. Thank you for that also. And thanks for the GitHub workflow for doing all the linting. So that is now here. And it is passing. Good. So this is good. So we also merged the package manager template. This was Steve's recommendation not to make it an issue, but do this so that people can sort of go off this. Next thing was, yeah, so this is merged. This is so the use cases by Steve. I think we can look at it again today, I think. Let's see what we need to do on that. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up was, I was just looking at the SPDX document itself, right? So what it looks to me is, okay, sorry, before we get there, Alex, you had your hand up.
Oh, you had mentioned Steve's PR, and I was just wondering, there's an existing, Kyle made an issue for use cases.
Yes.
And I didn't know if we were going to say that Steve satisfied that issue, or if that was referring to.
Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And the other thing was, I just want to bring this up. So this was the SPDX document, right? That is all this stuff is happening. So some of the work that we are doing is all this query related work. What it looks to me is, it is just my opinion, is that this is just this SPDX documentation would probably become a memoization of that query, whatever query we are going to support. So that will just become an instance of it, is what I would think. Okay, all right. So that's all I had to open. These are all my opening comments. So we can start. We can go with, you can start with
So on, yeah, I do. So on this one, to the question of does this satisfy Kyle's use case issue, I would say it's the beginning of it. It was basically meant to be more of, is this a format that we can capture them, because there's so much information, and how do we capture the use cases and capture the matrix on which package managers it currently applies to and which ones we'd want. We think about the various package managers all having similar but different implementations in places. What I mean by they supporting different scenarios, and rather than have yet another package manager because one of the package managers doesn't support scenario D, can we just add scenario D to one of the package managers, and who's got a good implementation of it that would be good to leverage. So it was really more a matter of, here's a template to facilitate the conversation, and then I just filled in one set of them simply because it was testing the use case, testing the template. So if folks are comfortable with it, then I would say, merge it, yep, and then start working what Kyle was asking. Say, okay, let's actually start filling that out with more of the use cases, and obviously not have us write them down necessarily for other package managers, but can we get the other package managers engaged to help us with what do they support, what do they like, what do they not like, what would they like to see added?
One of the use cases that I've been focusing on has been in data set management. So if you have this query capability and you can consider the contents of a registry or artifacts as part of a data set, then I think that use case might exist outside of like the package manager use case. And so I saw Kyle's issue as maybe encompassing the broader use cases, maybe outside of just strict package management, where we could say, yeah, submit an issue for like, how you could see this being leveraged, in different ways.
Yeah, but I think of your and maybe we should think about is it really a package manager or it's a package type use case or need? Like the one we were talking about from your demo last time was what is Helm capable of doing with Helm search through Chart Museum, and what is it they would like to achieve to identify the gaps we want to fill, in that case on OCI. But it could be any of these kind of things, like, how would you get an SBOM for a particular package? That would be an example.
And sorry, you're saying that you still see those as being in line with the package manager use cases then, and then not outside that use case?
Yeah, that's the thing that I realized is because the Helm one, like if we consider Chart Museum a package manager, then yes. But we see Chart Museum is something that's effectively being phased out in lieu of OCI, but we still have gaps to fill. So that's actually a perfect example, right? Of here's something that was spun up, didn't the success of the project outgrew the capabilities of what that quote package manager was trying to do with Chart Museum. So we transitioned to OCI to support it, but there was capabilities in Chart Museum that we never actually were able to implement. Turned out the scalability, reliable performance, all the IDs were more important than some of those capabilities. That's okay. But we still need those capabilities, not just for charts, Helm charts. We still need it for container images. We need it for Pulumi charts. We need it for whatever people are storing in OCI. And other package managers, whether it be NPM and others, also have that capability. So what can we do to document what other package managers have done? And I'll just use Chart Museum as a package manager, an example. And what worked and what didn't, and how do we, if we were to add that capability to OCI, for instance, what can we learn from the other ones? If we wanted to add something to NPM, like this is not all about OCI. This is about any of the package managers that want to add missing capabilities across that matrix.
You had mentioned SBOM formats as well. Would we consider those in the package manager use case, or do those exist outside?
That's always been the interesting debate, and I'd be curious what others think. My personal opinion is, if I'm going to get a particular artifact from a particular location, I'd want the SBOM to be alongside of it. I don't know why we have yet another SBOM service. So we could have another VEX service. Is there an SPDX service versus a Cyclone DX service? Like, none of those things to me make sense. If I've already configured my network security and reliability and copying boundaries to be the foo.io thing, then I get my bar package from that endpoint. Why couldn't I get the SBOM from that same location? Because the SBOM is for that particular package. Why do I want to go over here where my network engineers have not allowed me to talk to? Can we put those alongside? That's been my opinion around how we should support that. And I don't think it's just SBOMs, right? It's because, first of all, there's two different SBOM. There's two major SBOM formats. I'm sure there are others. There's DBOMs, maybe. There's Git bombs. There's VEX reports. There's statements of quality. All of those things I personally would love to see on the same endpoint as the primary service that's doing this content delivery. So how could we facilitate that with a set of APIs? And it's, again, not just OCI. If where people are using NPM, I'd love to see those capabilities added to NPM.
And I guess my question is just, are we gonna capture those use cases here with what you have here for package managers, or do we want something else within this repository to convey those concerns?
I think that's the question. I'd see, Ram, you've got your hand raised, but I was hoping we would capture that here, and if it doesn't work, then that's good feedback.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Steve is saying, right? So we have a single source of truth, and whether it is SPDX or whatever the query or they're all just presentation layer problems. But the data is just as we want it as a single source of truth, and that's it. So that that actually makes a lot of sense.
Anybody else? If there's no other, feedback or say like this doesn't work, then could we merge this one and then start doing PRs on top of it to meet the various scenarios and the use cases across different package managers, and then we can figure out whether this works or not, because it might be too complex. That's the piece that I wasn't sure of, having the table to try to manage the list as well. And quite frankly, this is, Ram, where we should probably merge what's looking at here, where OCIMD under package managers would merge with the template that you wrote.
Okay, Brandon.
So I was looking back through old notes, the charter, other stuff, just trying to get a feel for this. I don't feel like we've ever specifically said what the output is. We've kind of got some goals, some activities, things we want to do. But the direction I'm going with the question is, do we see the output of this being something of, this is how OCI registries are going to support this? Or are we going a different direction of saying, here's how we're going to make a new artifact hub of some kind that supports what we're going to create? And the answer to that will lead to all kinds of other questions.
Okay.
I saw Alex had your hand up, so I wasn't sure you wanted to.
Yeah, I do. I really thought that the output of this would be, and maybe I might have made an assumption as we were doing the working group chartering and planning, but I thought that it was. I see an OCI extension as functioning within OCI registry, or also being optionally existing outside of that, but essentially a data model to convey this single source of truth. I hesitate to use the word common data model because it seems triggering under certain conditions.
Yeah.
And then so the data model, the API definition, and then some reference implementation client that would make use of that API. Is that what you're asking, Brandon? Or
yeah. So to take that answer and to bring it back to Steve's question, because I realize it might have seemed like a little bit of a sidetrack there, but we've got a bunch of user stories we worked on a while back where we were talking about different kinds of goals we were looking for to get out of this. We've got a table here of some properties we're comparing to different kinds of other projects out there that are doing similar stuff like the PyPy and other package repos. And for me, I got a lot more out of the user stories than I do out of a table. The user stories gave me a lot more detail of, we need to create this feature to solve these problems, that I don't feel like I'm getting out of filter lists of packages.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. Ron.
No,
Okay.
I agree. I think the table is interesting. I think it's useful. We'll see if it pans out right. But I think Steve's point was that there's these documents that go with each one, right? Like PyPy is going to have a PyPy.markdown somewhere, and that discussion is going to be there. I think what comes out of this is the min set of features or capabilities that are necessary to add to OCI by way of an extension to support a broad range of use cases, right? Like Steve was kind of hinting at it when he was getting at, okay, a really good use case is PyPy or Helm, right? You look at Helm and you figure out what is their searching doing that they're not able to do with the way OCI is set up currently. and you look at PyPy, and if we can find some overlap and figure out where the minimum set of feature capabilities that we would need, I think we're in good shape there. That's I see that as like the major outcome of this initial effort.
And I just want to keep on reinforcing that this is not just about OCI, right? If OCI has done something in green, for instance, that, you know, Carvel or Cargo hasn't, it's not like, hey, everything goes in OCI. It's like, hey, can Cargo, if Cargo needs a capability and we figured it out on this, you know, chart, and maybe it came from Maven. This is not a center pivot. OCI is just one of many of the package managers that are out there.
And we know
My
that with
main-
many enterprise organizations, they're not just going to flip the switch and just say, okay, everything goes to OCI.
Right, exactly. But I think OCI is interesting in the sense that it's flexible enough and not specific enough that I'm hoping anybody creating a new artifact type would not try to create a new package manager. Not just because it's not an interesting science experiment, but it's expensive to run these and ask customers and cloud providers to run new package managers. So if somebody's already like, and you know, JFrog with Artifactory and Nexus with their product, they already have the ability to host all these different package types. As a new artifact comes out, if it fits into Maven, great, use Maven. But if there's a gap missing in Maven that we're capturing in this table, and if you want to click the link for the other preview I put in the chat session, because then Maven could add that capability. And that'd be awesome.
I'm like scrambling trying to find the charter here, because I thought when in our early planning for the working group we had addressed enhancements or parity with or making use of the pointer URLs so that we weren't pigeonholing people into OCI implementations where they'd be discovering the content in remote repositories. And I think that's just really important, because I think if we say that they have to migrate into OCI, I don't see this being very effective. But I think that like if the query endpoint exists on an OCI registry, I think that's something different. Maybe that's just a convenience. Maybe. But I could also see the query endpoint existing outside of an OCI registry as a standalone resource.
Yeah, depending on what we're trying to create, I could also see myself digging into what the query endpoint looks like, and maybe what we finally realize that we need doesn't require all the functionality we think we need to create in OCI. And so I want to be sure that I don't go pigeonhole too far down that certain path if that's not what we're creating.
Brandon, I just actually ran into that this last week as I was continuing to iterate on my proof of concept. I realized that I was only making use of OCI because it was convenient for essentially I hadn't implemented a GraphQL like upload capability, so I was using OCI just for convenience of being able to upload things to a remote resource, and I realized that actually OCI is a little bit limiting when you think about this, because if we had certain information, it might be really not ineffective, inefficient to use OCI to convey. Like if we had like machine learning, we wanted to dissolve a model into a query or something, conveying that model, like a 7 billion parameter model with an OCI registry might just be super inefficient. So we might actually be better off not pursuing that as a like a primary storage backend.
Yeah, we could go that direction. We could go a complete 180 from that direction of saying, well, what does Helm actually need to implement their query? And that was one of my thought processes, which maybe you don't need depending on what Helm is actually doing, because I haven't dug into what the search functionality is. Maybe you just need a top level index that everybody registers in. And then from there, each repo says, here are all the tags in this repo. You can look them up. You can go individual, and it's like a 2-tier search. It really depends on what we're creating. And so that's where I want to make sure that I don't go too far down any one path if it's the wrong way we're looking at.
Well, I think we want to capture the needs, because what you just described is why Chart Museum didn't scale. Is it required you to it required somebody to maintain, upload a chart.yaml, I think it was. I can't remember the exact format, but basically the client was required for creating a file of all the versions that you would upload, and then the next client would come by and have to download this file. And it's great as long as there's like 12 to 20. But if you're trading a chart for every build and it's done many builds a day, it just doesn't scale. So that's what the beginning of the tags API sort of does, but it doesn't have any kind of query filtering. But we kind of have to go back. Like, one of the requirements is scale, right? It's not just, hey, I need to be able to get a specific version. It's like, I need to be able to get a specific version when there's 20,000 versions just in that one repo. So how do we build something that meets needs and scalability, and then you get all the other security and IDs as well. And again, the other package managers have done this. Like NPM has the ability to get specific versions, has ability to know what's the latest version in that version band, for instance. Whether it's Semver or Calver is a different set of challenges. But what is
I was going to say that I think Brandon's kind of line of thinking here is really useful, because I think it could as I don't know how pertinent it is to the topic of Steve's PR here, but I do think it's an interesting concern, and I'm wondering if by aggregating the information that through Steve's PR, his proposed solution for this aggregation, that we would actually be able to quickly identify what it is we actually need to provide with the API. And Brandon, are you saying that you feel like this doesn't fully capture what we would need to identify our approach to the API?
When I was looking back at our old user stories, they were a very different structure. I'll throw that link over in the chat here, but it was things like, hey, we need to be able to discover artifacts by labels. We need to be able to annotate these things. And so we were really building out stories of, I have this feature request and here's what it's going to give me. And it was a structure of requirements that was a little bit more useful to me. But like I say, it depends
if in this format, because remember what I was saying also is the content in here wasn't meant to be anything other than representative. Like with that, if you were to explain that need, describe that, and I believe that's why I click on the other link. Could this template, this format, capture that?
So where the table felt restrictive to me is what happens when I need to add another row. Assuming that the rows weren't another row for just like another requirement. Then we have to go back through each one of these things and say, hey, do these things do that? And I feel like the outcome isn't so much, does PyPy do that? But if we're looking at, hey, how do we extend OCI? It's just a list of requirements we're throwing at OCI, and we care whether or not it supports it.
Well, but that was again, this is not an OCI specific thing, right? This is our users in the industry work across multiples of this package. They don't necessarily work across all of them all the time, but they work across more than one all the time. There are certain use cases that may not be relevant to all package managers, and that's okay. So maybe just coincidence, maybe a white circle doesn't mean unknown. Maybe a white circle is equivalent to NA, or we could come up with another symbol. But the red and green are specifically meant to, like, this is needed and supported, or needed and not supported. That's what the table was meant to imply. And if you look at the use cases.md first one, who's sharing? Rom, is that still you? Yeah, it's you.
It's Ron.
Rob, can you
Yes. Yeah, sorry.
click this link that I'm pasting in there now? And just scroll down a little bit. So what I did here, and Brendan, to your point, the format to be able to do this in Markdown might be too complex. I spent some time trying to make it more manageable. But if you were to write the use case here in this list, this is like the master use cases. And then it's up to whoever is making PRs on each package manager to decide, do they want to discuss their implementation of that row? So if you went to PyPy, for instance, because it's one of the files I happen to create in addition to OCI, you may not see list versions just because that's the one I'm staring at, not because it's meaningful. Because they don't think it's relevant, don't think it's needed. And it could be a gap that it is there, nobody wrote it down, or it could be that they just don't think it's needed. But this could be, is this a format that we could use to capture all those use cases? And then it's up to each package manager to decide how they want to discuss their satisfaction of that use case. So don't get caught up in the text that you see. Does the format match what you would want to list, including the old use cases that you're referring to?
Yeah, for all the use cases, I would probably need to spend a little more time digging into it, but I just wanted to make sure to raise that. But I think I've hogged enough of the time on that one. So if you want to keep going through with the PR, that sounds good to me.
Okay. I mean, I'm generally curious, like, do you think this format would work for you for that? Let's just, and I don't think you are uniquely focused on OCI, but let's just say you are for a second. Would
You
would
can assume
this,
that.
I'm trying to, I'm assuming people are working on multiples. Could you add, and let's say you have a use case that wasn't captured here. Could you put a row here on this page, do a PR on this page, the use cases MD, put that on there, then you can make the PR that changes or adds the row and then puts the circle color for OCI. And then the other ones are left white. Like if whoever adds a row, they can only add a colored circle to the ones that they're actually describing. And you would go and also make under package managers, and I realize the file, I'll match your, I'll make a PR change to match your format ROM for the folder structure. And then you would see an OCI MD, and then you could talk about how this page has the generic specifics of what the scenario is. And then in the OCI MD, you're describing, this is how OCI implemented it.
Yeah, I think this can work for what you want to do. It just felt a little awkward depending on what our output is. And so if our output is focused on all package managers, then I think you're going down the right path.
It's a, oh, I hate the word clearinghouse because that didn't work last time. It's a place to capture common information across the package managers. Because I think we have tended to, I hadn't really thought about how I'm saying this now. I think we often look at individual package managers in isolation, and I think there's an opportunity for us to look at package managers a little more consistently across them because our users just don't use just one. And I think the SBOM, signing, Vex are great examples of why we need to add capabilities to all the package managers, because please, please, please do not create an SBOM service, or specifically an SPDX SBOM service. Let's please put the SBOMs on the artifacts that they're describing for a multitude of reasons, for the where you maintain them, to where users pull them, to how they age over time, to life cycle management. There's just a whole bunch of reasons why it'd be good for information that is needed across multiple package managers to be the type of information, not that the same information is copied across all of them, but they can host them themselves. So that was just a good example of like, hey, how do you discover, and maybe one of them is how do you discover SBOMs for your artifact? In OCI, we have the reference types.
What about so this seems very focused on API characteristics and data model, and what those how those are leveraged by a package format or package manager. Are we concerned with transport or protocol? in interacting with these resources. And so like I think like one would be like traditionally you would retrieve OCI container or image from an OCI registry. But like, what if you wanted to shove it into IPFS or something? I don't know. So should we be concerned with like transport when we're considering this, or is this strictly API characteristics and like the data model of the package type?
So yeah, so I don't know if you want to say, for example, let's ask this, right? So so if you prescribe a data model on the disk, for example, so would npm, rpm, deb, all those move to that? That is highly unlikely, I think. But getting something as an API query, that is more likely. So you don't want to set the bar way too high. That people will come and say, "Meh, we don't want to do this."
Yeah, that was going to be my point. I was trying to figure out a good way to phrase it, but we've got a lot of people here that are from the OCI side for obvious reasons. That's how we kind of got connected. And if we go out and say, hey, here's a new data model for how we attach SBOMs to Alpine, Cargo, Maven, NPM, all these different repos, PyPy, and we expect them to update it, I don't think we've got the people available to make those changes here. And so I'd want to make sure that we have whatever connections we need if we're going to go that direction.
I also tend to follow the ain't broke. If it ain't broke, don't fix it model. Like if it's working for that ecosystem.
Yep. So querying, I think a data model for a query, it's more reasonable. I think that's probably a low bar for most things, so that they don't have to. So it's going to be incremental for most package managers out there. So they'll say, okay, let's just implement this, keep whatever we have, and it will satisfy this requirement. And that's a much smaller hump to get over.
Just so it doesn't go unsaid, Steve, you're preaching to the choir when you say you want to solve this problem across a whole bunch of ecosystems, because I definitely want to see that happen. I just want to make sure that we have the capability to make it happen.
So, for example, like the OCI registries do not have a formal query interface, right? So this, if you add this, it will be an additive interface without touching anything else. I think that is going to be awesome. So I'm hoping that happens with other things too, Helm and others. So.
I sorry, I don't mean to pull this back, and like I have to be remediated here in my understanding of some of this stuff. But when I can see within OCI, like in we can debate whether how effective my demo was last time or not. But like in that example, I was uploading essentially like an Intel attestation to a registry. The registry was seeing the attestation and then indexing it. In what we're talking about though with PyPy and NPM and these things, we're gonna have to have an announce, right? So is that what we're saying? You're gonna have to send an announcement to the index to say this content exists over here in NPM or PyPy or as a Helm chart, right? So like we're gonna have to have a data model, or we're gonna have to support a data model that we index on, right? Or are we saying that's not what we're saying?
I feel like the direction a lot of people have gone is to say if you're pulling your package from PyPy, you should pull your SBOM, your VEX report, and everything else from that same PyPy server. And so at that point, we're talking about extending the PyPy artifact repository API, however they want to consider that change on their side, however we would have to implement it. It would be a change to their system. And so once we take that leap, I think that's a big jump compared to some of the stuff that you might have been thinking before of setting up a server on the side. If you do set up a server on the side, then it becomes a question of how do you know to go to your server and not someone else's server, and how many of these servers are there?
And do you have access to it? Because I don't know a customer isn't trying to lock down all the various places they can connect to.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I was just because I've been in from the OCI camp. You know, I upload stuff to the registry, and then it's very easy to index it from there. But then when we start talking about where this disaggregate or this distributed content exists, and like then I start wondering how do we index it, and that's been my or should we be indexing npm with PyPy and Helm, and then there might be benefit or like observability or transparency in that, where we can see different lineage and concerns like that too. But yeah, these are all considerations I've been wondering, but I don't take them for granted. I know that there's different approaches to different ways to solve this problem.
The reason I think you hear a bunch of the OCI people chiming in with almost in unison on this is because we've lived through Notary v1, which was implemented as a side service next to the registry, and portability and a bunch of other concerns there were big problems with it, and just getting it implemented because it was a completely separate service. It just didn't work for us.
That's fair. I don't have those. I don't share those battle scars. I guess I'm in the next generation of OCI adopters.
And that one was even more confusing because it sort of looked like it was even on the same endpoint, but it was a separately managed service. So it was even more confusing. So
how is that contrast with this concept of an OCI extension for providing the search capability? What's the difference between these two concepts?
So extensions are a way you can add another path or another endpoint into the same registry API. And so a registry server would support that extension. So it's a way that we can add new functionality to individual registries and test stuff out. If it becomes popular, awesome, great. But it may also be a thing where you get to a certain point and say, you know what, we've got this far enough. We came up with a proof of concept. Maybe OCI wants to standardize this. And so it became your own sandbox proving ground to prove out that you could do it without having to worry about breaking other existing functionality. It's both. So don't let that answer make it sound like I was steering you down either one path. It's both a way that individual registries can say, we're going to add new functionality in there, and a whole bunch of people can adopt that same functionality if they want to.
So maybe it makes sense to go back to Brandon's question of what are we doing? Like what is the output product of this, right? I'm hearing some mixed messages from various people here, and I think that, I mean, I'm going to put my OCI hat on because I like OCI, right? I'm in that camp. So I think the output is an extension, at least initially. Maybe it evolves, like Brandon was saying, into OCI more formal, but it's an extension. So there's an API specification for OCI that allows us to do some of these more fancy things like the Helm search kind of capability, or the PyPy example use case that I showed, right? And that would require us to, the artifacts have to provide some type of consistent metadata of some sort, whatever that looks like. And then the registry has to index it and make it available, right? You can argue, I'm gonna make this is my opinion, but I'm gonna argue that the approaches that package managers take with respect to downloading the entire index are fraught with peril from a scalability perspective, right? Apt update being one. Helm was an example in this last hour that was mentioned, but there are many others. You don't download the whole index; it's just too big. So you need to be able to query. So then that becomes how robust? What's the minimal set for the query language or whatever it is that allows us to get to where we would want to be to solve those two problems, for example.
As a long-lived Debian user, the app search is really interesting to me because in that scenario, you do have a local cache of every package that's in the repository, and you're searching against that. And the way they distribute it is they include diffs that you can query and just get the diff. And OCI lends itself really well to that kind of model, where you just push a diff as another layer, and then you query the manifest, and you see I've got a whole bunch of these diffs, and here's where I last caught up. So that's where I want to say that there are potentially different ways that we could solve this. It could be a specific API, but it could also be we've got static storage the same way the Debian repos have static storage that clients are querying, and that turns into a client-heavy operation. So multiple approaches are possible here.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a fork in the road.
I think without getting into the implementations, I think that's part of what we want to capture, the requirements, right? Like it's not to say that one couldn't implement, different ways. I think there's, well, I don't want to start pulling on that thread, but I think it's just going back to what are the requirements we're trying to solve.
I guess a question for the group, kind of to follow on what Kyle just and Brandon and Steve have said. If there's more than one way to do this, and there's already implementations of different ways, does Steve's PR here provide a good way of capturing that information so that we can consolidate it and then learn across implementations? I think that's the point, right? So the question for the group here is, is there a specific change that we want to propose to Steve in this PR, or is it just a no, we don't like it, or are we gonna accept it as is?
My suggested changes are so drastic that I think I would say, let's just go ahead and accept this and get this into the books and do whatever work we want to do on this, realizing we may take it a very different direction.
To that end,
that's
yes.
I think that's the main point, is it's progress that we could at least test. And if we don't like it, sure, we could turn directions. And just to test the theory of what you just said, Brandon, like, and obviously not OCI, I forgot which one you just mentioned, whatever other package manager that you're using those diffs for, add that column. And just in that particular page for that package manager under the ROM's folder structure, I just pushed a PR to change that, or pushed a change to that PR, so that you could describe this is why it worked, or you can just say why it didn't work, right? There's both pros and cons. I think we want to learn from other implementations' mistakes as much as the things that were good, so that when we try to make something better than what's good, we can learn like, oh, that other one tried that, and here's the ways it horribly failed. Short names is an example of one that I can think of. Good attempt at a very valid problem, really bad implementation in hindsight, not in foresight. And let's avoid doing that one again. So let's document what you're describing on that particular package manager. And we can use that for evaluation for others.
Will do. And yeah, I just want to make sure that you put a lot of work into this. I want to make sure we didn't lose your work here.
I don't mind throwing shit out if it doesn't work.
If the group here is a consensus or an agreement around at least trying this out, then we have 10 minutes left in this meeting, and maybe we could talk about how we're going to solicit, advertise, petition, or otherwise elicit participation around this template. Do we want to take on action items, contacting specific maintainers or projects? Is that a good way to go, or is there another way to go about populating this information?
How much of this can we do ourselves? Like how many people in here know some of these different package repos.
And maybe we need to do that to show that there's enough here for others to spend their time.
I agree. I think at least we have to seed it with some information, and I will volunteer for some of them. Actually, I'm familiar with a few, so I'll put in what I have, and then we can build on it.
Just don't confuse my organizational affiliation with any understanding about RPM whatsoever.
Thanks for clarifying that, Alex.
I'm dialed into you with a Chromebook right now. If that's any yeah. Okay, well, that being said, we have 9 minutes left. Do we want to have anybody take on any action items here to seed this information? Does anybody does anybody feel comfortable providing at least some initial insights into these package formats or any familiarity? Just as a way to kind of just make sure that we have something to kind of step away from this meeting with.
Should we make some issues for maybe the top few that we want to go after first that we think are higher priority or something?
Yes, that's a good idea.
It was something I read a few weeks ago, which has been inspiring me in a lot of the work that I do here. They called it the 10-80-10 rule, where the idea was, like, as a manager, like you do the first 10% of the work, then turn it over to somebody to let them do the next 80%, and then you come in at the last 10 to refine it and get it done. So the main reason I bring that up is that first 10%, I like how it came up here, getting a couple in there, opening some issues, like that will prevent a lot of like hurting back at the end. So I like that.
Steve's already identified a couple, I think, like preliminary targets that we can document. So do we just want to take those package managers that he's already identified and just make corresponding issues for those, and then people can just jump on those?
That was my plan, actually.
Well, maybe people can chime in on which ones they think are valuable to look at, right? So Helm has come up many times. That sounds reasonable, right? In my mind. PyPy has come up many times. Apt or RPM or whichever one people are more familiar with, that I'm guessing they do similar things. I think Homebrew is kind of interesting in that they already store their artifacts in OCI. They used to store their index, their catalog in Git, and they just switched recently to a JSON file or something, and maybe it's a diff of a JSON file. I don't know. But there's a reason they changed, and that reason is interesting.
What do they use to distribute the JSON file, if that's what you're saying?
They have their own like server that deals with that part. The data, I think. I don't think it's just static, but I could be wrong. It might be fully static and there's no diff, but they do store all their data in OCI.
Oh, I see. So it's the data is distributed with the registries people have today, but there was something missing that they had to come up with a different service for discovery.
Yeah, because the whole catalog piece is missing.
Oh, that would be an awesome one to capture. I would love to find the person that did that implementation for them to describe, this is what was missing and this is why I had to do this very painful thing.
Right.
That's specifically called casks or bottles?
This was for bottles.
Okay. I always hear casks and bottles. I don't know the difference. I was just wondering if that's
casks are like the big binary ones. Bottles are the ones that you can brew yourself. You can build them yourself from source if you want to.
Gotcha. Okay.
They usually come bottled. So I guess it's the recipes. Whatever. I don't know. The analogies are are rough in my mind. They're fun though, but yeah.
And Brandon, if you want to capture the the format you were talking about for that delta, because I know you talked about it a couple of times over the years of the doing stuff more client side. Like to me,
Yeah.
being the service implementation or person historically in databases, that gives me the heebie-jeebies. But if I can see it, maybe I can get more comfortable with it.
Can we talk about that in the next meeting? Brandon, could you maybe carve out some time to present on that? Because I'm actually really interested in that. That was our initial implementation with Emporis. It was all client-side searching. And essentially my manager came back to me and he was like, dude, he's like, this is never going to scale the way that you need it to. And so that's why we ended up coming up with the Artifact API way back with Emporis stuff. So I'm really interested in how you solve that problem from a client-side processing perspective.
Yeah, I won't say I solved it. I've just seen other people solve it. And it's the Debian solution, which is very much designed to be distributed over CDNs. And so they focused on how do we push this stuff out as static files in a repo that anybody can just query. And the package database is just a giant text file that's gzipped. And clients pull it down, and then they pull down diffs.
Yeah. And an ephemeral client, the last 5 seconds that has to get a specific package manager. How does that happen efficiently?
I mean, they just have to run an update again to see whatever changed since the last time they ran it. But that's why Debian, every time you run an apt-get, you have to run an apt update first, is you're pulling down that whole package database first.
You've ruined my my hopes and dreams for a subsequent presentation on this in our next meeting.
Sorry. I mean, look, I think that there's a time and place where that does work. Don't get me wrong. Like, this is not like this is a horrible idea from the beginning. It's just when we shift from stateful servers and environments, which are still out there, like obviously registry services are stateful, they maintain their stuff, but the clients that communicate with them, it's a build server that comes up for hopefully no more than 30 seconds. And it starts with 0 state because you never want to cache anything more than you absolutely positively have to on it. Now I got to bring down the delta, which is everything since 1990. And just making a date like that just doesn't scale. If you have a stateful server, I'm bringing down the delta. Sure.
Yeah, the delta is if you have state, and if you don't, you just pull down the gzip of everything. But everything is whatever the current state is, and their package repo doesn't continually grow indefinitely. There's a version or a couple versions within each release of Debian.
We got 1 minute left. I'm just going to ask is anybody working on anything in the working group or know of anybody working on something that we could get maybe a presentation in our next working group session, or just throwing it out there. And we can also take it to Slack too. I just want to throw that out there for people to think about.
I should be able to present my work soon. Like it's been approved, but for public release, but I don't have the presentation material approved. So I should be able to do that soon, not next time, maybe the time after.
Cool.
Ram, you got any closing comments?
We'll crack open some beers. All right, I think that's all I have. Okay, there's work to do, I guess. Let's tackle the action items.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Hugo, sorry, there was a new person that we should have asked him to introduce himself. That's okay.
Darn. Okay. Maybe we can get him in Slack and get him to introduce himself in the next meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Take care.
Have a nice day. Bye.